Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the discussion. My name is Michał Strachowski, and it's my pleasure to be a moderator for this debate with Professor Brague, our distinguished guest. First of all, I will introduce to all our guests, to all of you, our guests from France. Professor Brague is a historian of philosophy, specializing in the Arabic, Jewish, and Christian thought of the Middle Ages. He is a professor emeritus of Arabic and religious philosophy at the Sorbonne University, and Romano Guardini Chair of Philosophy at the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich. In 2009, he received the Grand Prix from Philosophy of the French Academy. And in 2012, the Ratzinger Award, which is considered to be a Nobel Prize in Theology. Cardinal Camillo Ruini, at the time the president of the Ratzinger Foundation Academic Committee, praised Brague as a true philosopher and at the same time a great historian of cultural thought who unites a profound and unequivocal Christian and Catholic faith to his speculative ability and historical vision. Books he was written include Eccentric Culture, The Wisdom of the World, The Law of God, The Legend of the Middle Ages, and most recently, The Kingdom of Man, Genesis, and Failure of the Modern Project. So, welcome, Professor Brague. Okay, so my first question is, you wrote in The Kingdom of Man, your most recent book, that our humanism is an anti-humanism rather than a direct affirmation of the goodness of the human. And that ended with the question, does humankind still have the will to survive in an era of intellectual self-destruction? What do you mean by that? What does it mean for you?
Well, first of all, let me apologize for not being able to answer this question in Polish. I'm afraid I'll have to speak in some English of sorts. Okay, I have to use this contraption.
No, it's switched on.
It's switched on. Okay, well, sorry for not being able to speak Polish. I regret that, but the only language I can offer you, apart from the native French, is English or German, but German is, for some reason, I've heard, not especially beloved in this country. Well, anyway, where you were alluding to the book that I wrote a matter of 2 years ago. It's been just published in an English translation, and I've heard that you are. Teologia Polityczna is translating it into Polish, which is quite a flattering piece of news for me. And well, what I wrote exactly is that what we call at present a defense of humanism is in fact a reaction against the fear that this humanism could be defeated. We do not especially want to foster humanism, but we are afraid we get cold feet in front of the idea of its demise. If humanism would disappear, the consequences would be awful. That's what we think. And for this reason, many people right now in the whole of the Western world feel sort of compelled to defend something like the dignity of man or his or her nobility without their believing in an intrinsic, in a natural dignity or nobility of what not of man. We have sort of lost the confidence in the superior value of mankind, which was still a matter, of course, in the Italian Renaissance. I am alluding in particular to the to the tidal wave of treatises on the dignity of man that began in the right in the middle of the 15th century, more precisely in 1453, an ominous date for other reasons, and that lasted for approximately 1 century and a half, till the modern project of a conquest of nature set in, with the clarion call of Francis Bacon, launching the idea according to which we have to become the masters of nature. But the very nature of this master, which is supposed to be mankind, was sort of jeopardized, or at least menaced by the very modern project. And in our present-day situation, we are caught in a catch-22 of sorts, you know. We have sort of painted ourselves into a corner. We feel that dropping the idea of the dignity of man would have dire consequences. It would be, well, chaos, or, well, a world of sheer violence and things. But on the other hand, so many people among us have lost the ground, the very ground, the reason, the basis for the affirmation of a nobility of man. In pre-modern times, the answer, well, was either man is human beings are the masterpieces of nature. And for this reason, we have to defend them against whatever is not human, or would menace to bring mankind back to a status that would be inferior, i.e. the status of, let's say, animality or things like that. The other possibility of an answer was the biblical idea of God having created human beings in his image, and as endowed with the task of perfecting this image by getting back the similitude they had lost with the original sin. Those answers were clear. But for some reason, modern mankind decided to try and do without those answers, and to affirm human dignity without any ability to find somewhere, either in nature or in God, a foundation for this dignity. That's the predicament we are in. Oh, that's the predicament so many modern people, or allegedly modern people, are in at present. That's what I meant. You know, perhaps you've quoted my sentence in a shortened form. You know? Our humanism is an anti-humanism, is a reaction against whatever is a menace for humanism. But we don't have any, so many people, we Christians have an answer, but so many people have no way for them to explain why the heck they should defend mankind. For on the one hand, we listen voices which tell us, well, man is only a successful ape, or even man is the worst of all living beings, the most dangerous ones, the universal predator, the living being which menaces the life of each and every other human being on the surface of the earth. And for this reason, why should we insist on keeping mankind afloat? Perhaps the best thing to do would be simply to do away with it. This is a question that is more than merely academic. This is a live question. This is a question for each of us and for each culture or alleged culture. in the Western world.
Okay, well, you mentioned about these anti-humanism, but
perhaps I may speak too quickly or too indistinctly. No,
yeah.
That's a question, you know.
Yeah.
You can't follow. Well, stop following me or I call a cop.
Okay, but can we trace this, the origins of this anti-humanism, not to the to the 18th century, but to the Renaissance, or even earlier?
Well, I'm afraid I'll be able to give only a qualified answer to this question. What I'm trying to do in the book that you are translating at present is to show that the present situation, what I call the present predicament, for this is a difficult and unpleasant situation, well, set in several steps, you know. It did not come out of the blue. Well, for instance, in the 19th century or in some periods of time, you know, it first began with the affirmation of the difference, the radical difference between human beings and the rest of the living beings. Then they added in the early 17th, already in late Greek antiquity, Greek and Roman antiquity, they added the idea according to which mankind is not only radically different from the rest of the living beings, but superior. Okay, not simply something else, but something better. Okay. Then there was a third step which set in, as I told you, with the early 17th century, with Francis Bacon and our French sacred cow, Descartes, who simply cribbed the whole stuff from Bacon on this point, i.e. we added to the idea of the difference and of the superiority the idea of the necessity of a conquest. We have to subdue, mankind has to subdue the rest of creation. Mankind has to lord it over the other human beings and still more over, plants and minerals. Okay. Man has to become master and owner of nature, to quote a well-known formula by Descartes. A third step was added in the 19th century when some people in Germany, in France, perhaps in Poland too, but I'm not aware of that, added a fourth idea, the idea according to which there is no superior being, there is nothing above man. Man is the supreme being. And by the way, it's interesting that the supreme being was the way in which some thinkers of the French Enlightenment, and in their wake, some leaders of the French Revolution, formulated the idea of God, but not just any God, and in particular, certainly not the Christian God, but a God who could sort of ensure the order, the moral and political order of society, i.e. a God reduced to his function of a heavenly cop, of a heavenly policeman, in charge of rewarding nice people and punishing the villains. Okay. And well, this supreme being in the 19th century became man himself. We find the formula under the pen of my fellow countryman, the philosopher Auguste Comte. And we find very much the same on the other side of the Rhine under the pen of Karl Marx. And there are equivalents in Britain as well. In Britain, the word humanism was coined with a new meaning. It was Victorian England. In Victorian England, atheism was hardly the thing. This was not done. It was not done to be an atheist. So real atheists had to find, words that could sort of soften the idea and avoid the dangerous, the untoward word theism. And for this reason, they coined, for instance, secularism, agnosticism, and humanism. In present-day Britain, humanism is a nice word, a polite word, to say atheist. Sorry, humanist is a word for atheist. Humanism is a nice word for atheism. And now, in my opinion, well, it's very difficult to find, you know, the causes of a historical phenomenon. If you ask a historian, I'm no historian, I'm only a poor philosopher. If you ask an historian about the causes of an event, say the causes of the First World War, okay, which we were celebrating last time, well, there are two solutions. If the historian is badly educated, he will guffaw. If he's well educated, he will have a discreet and polite smile and tell you, oh, you know, I'm only a poor historian. Historians can only tell stories. You know, they can unravel the plots that are behind the events. But as far as causes are concerned, this is a metaphysical question. Okay. And well, I will try to imitate them and perhaps venture some steps in the direction of an assessment of a possible cause with many quotation marks. I see a watershed of sorts, well, precisely in the third step, which I mentioned, i.e., the endeavor of a conquest of nature, becoming the Lord over nature. And this is an attempt that was launched, as I told you, in the early 17th century, right after the vogue of treatises on the dignity of human beings, dignity and or nobility. It is as if, I say prudently, it is as if I'm not putting forward a positive thesis, let's say hypothesis if you prefer. It is as if this project of conquering nature had replaced the former idea of an intrinsic dignity of mankind. And well, what I suspect is the social and intellectual equivalent of a psychological fact. Let us compare two kinds of people. On the one hand, a nobleman of old stock, you know, the offspring of a family which hails back to the Crusades. Okay. And on the other hand, an upstart who came from, the ragtag and bobtail, and by his luck or work, possibly, became rich and made a fortune. Who will be the more unbearable of the two? Certainly not the nobleman of old stock, for he or she is convinced of his or her intrinsic nobility. He won't have to tell other people, just look at me and see how beautiful, how great, how powerful, how whatnot I am. He or she will take this for granted. Whereas the upstart who knows that his or her origins are low, will have to tell people, oh, just see how great I am. And well, the will among people to lord it over other people, the desire of being the boss, might be some sort of phenomenon of compensation. Compensation for the loss of the evident character of one's intrinsic nobility. And well, I am struck, this is something that is not yet in my book. Or perhaps there might be traces of that, but that's the hypothesis I venture to blurt out at present, i.e., the cause, with many quotation marks once again, or at least the condition of possibility of the enterprise of a conquest of nature might be some sort of failure of nerve, some sort of consciousness of a loss, the loss of the intrinsic dignity of man. And well, might possibly, the Reformation might have played a part. For the Reformation, I mean Luther and first of all Calvin, the French reformer, introduced the idea of a radical perversity of human beings, according to classical, well, run-of-the-mill even Catholic dogmatics, what was lost with and by the original sin is not the knowledge of what is good, but the strength to do it. As in Paul, I know what is good and I don't do it. I hate what is bad and I do it all the same. According to Calvin, the corruption of human nature is so deep that it corrupts the very consciousness of what we should do. We have not even a full conscience of the good and of the evil. This is the doctrine of radical corruption, known among theologians. That's a well-known idea. And well, I wonder whether in order to compensate this new consciousness of a radical corruption, i.e., in the wake of the loss of the idea of a dignity that remains in the teeth of the fall, in the teeth of the original sin, mankind, Western mankind, was sort of, well, compelled to launch into this enterprise of conquering nature. But this is, to repeat, only a hypothesis, something I feel in my bones, nothing more.
So, is there any way out? It's like, is there any, can you reverse that process, or? We are successors of the of this thinking, aren't we?
Well, it's up to us. It's up to us. We are, to the best of my knowledge, free beings. We certainly are influenced by, well, what's in the air, as the idiom has it, by the ideas that, well, are wafted to us by untoward winds. But we can say yes, no. We can say no, we are, in spite of whatever could teach us the contrary, we are well, noble people. Not a social nobility, but an intrinsic and ontological nobility, because we were endowed by the Creator with, well, whatever makes out our nobility: freedom, the sense of the good and evil, and a moral consciousness and things. Yeah. We don't have to follow blindly the spirit of the age. But this is a question that is asked, that holds good for each and every of us. Yeah? I don't think there can be, let's say, well, perhaps political measures to be taken about this, against this idea. The utmost that we can do is to create conditions in which people could get back the consciousness of the lofty, the sublime, nature of their being, in the teeth of all temptations to reduce ourselves to, well, let's say, well, lucky apes or whatnot.
But by saying we, you mean Europeans, Christians, or by that we are able to save, to reverse this process. Who's able to do it?
Well, yeah, there's something I really can't do. I can't foresee the future. And there's something, in spite of that I can tell you, there are conditions that foster, well, the disappearance of humankind. And there are conditions which foster its furtherance, its going on. And, well, those conditions are highly simple at first blush, but they presuppose a whole world view. A world view according to which, well, what is at stake first is important and deserves to be preserved. And this is a whole anthropology, a whole conception of man, of human beings, sorry. Yeah? And without this conception, I think that in the long run, we could undergo some sort of process of natural selection. You know, Darwin well, launched into the intellectual world this idea of a natural selection. There are, well, features in some living beings that render them fit for survival. And, well, creatures who were not endowed with this feature are simply doomed in the long run to disappear. And, well, it's, well, not very much the same thing, but something like that. There's something like that in our present-day situation. There are people, individuals, and societies who, for some reason, did not receive the features that would enable them to go on living. There are other individuals and societies which, again for some reason, did receive those features that make them able of a, well, of a continuation of life. And, well, in the long run, if I were an out-and-out Darwinian, I would say, well, people who believe in the dignity of man, people or peoples, yeah, societies, nations that believe in the dignity of man will survive. The other ones will disappear. And that's it. This is not very Christian, This is Darwinian. But there may be some truth in that.
So, do you think the secular Europe will survive, or someone in Europe will survive? Some communities, for example.
Some years ago already, if I'm not mistaken, if my memory serves me right, I was already given the opportunity to give a bit of thought to the word secular, which is a very interesting word in itself, you know. The word secular in English, and there's probably the same word in Polish, in French there is one, in any case. All those words stem from the Latin word saeculum, and saeculum means a century, a century. This was not the original meaning of the Latin word. The original meaning was the maximum duration of the life of a human individual. And in order to get a rounder number, well, the meaning shifted to designate to the present-day designation, i.e., 100 years. Now, 100 years is an interesting duration. That's, roughly speaking, the maximal duration of the life of an individual, as just been saying. Yeah? And well, secularism is the doctrine of people for whom the maximal hope of survival for a human being, since a secular person does not believe in the immortality of the soul, let alone in the resurrection of the flesh. The maximal hope for a secular person is to be able to lead a peaceful and happy life of 100 years. But a secular person is not allowed, has no reason to introduce into this life other beings. Giving birth to children is a highly undemocratic gesture, and highly undemocratic action. We can't ask the children whether they want to enter this world or not. And for this reason, a secular person will, for excellent, for morally unimpeachable reasons, refrain from having kids. And if this person has kids, this is because he or she is simply inconsequent, not faithful to his or her own principles. And for this reason, while I say, well, secularism is the doctrine that first assumes that the longest possible duration for mankind is 1 century, and on the second hand, acts accordingly and produces a situation that will bring about the disappearance of mankind in 1 century. This is not a sheer joke. Of course, I said all this with my tongue in my cheek, but not only. There's something serious about that, you know. The intrinsic logic of secularism is sort of contained in the very word that it uses. Of course, people who use this word don't know and don't think their own worldview through. If they would give it up, or I hope.
Okay, well, it's not a very pleasant perspective, isn't it? Maybe the modern Islam is an answer for the secular process, for the secularization.
Well,
is it possible to create something like a liberal Islam?
Well, Islam is for me the topic of some reflections right now. I happen to be writing, among other things, a book on Islam. And the trouble is that you can't hardly have at the same time an Islamic outlook on life and a reasoned, a worldview that is grounded on a reasonable and or informed, led by reason, view of things. To come back to my question, I'll get back to the question of Islam later on. I'm not that pessimistic about the future of mankind as far as mankind is constituted of featherless bipeds. You know, that's the definition, the ironical definition, the definition that was poked fun at by Diogenes. There's this story about Plato defining man, human beings, as featherless bipeds. People who have two legs but no feathers. And if we mean by human beings simply the living being that has two legs, walks on the hind legs only, have a hand and does things, well, there is instinct. And instinct will take care of the furtherance of mankind in the same way as it takes care of the furtherance of the bees in their beehive, or of lions in the jungle, or whatnot. What I am far less sanguine about is the future of a rational being, of a being which acts not because it is driven by instinct, but because it has as its lodestar reason and freedom. With instinct, we need no reason, and we are not free. The instinct is a force that pushes up from the rear and compels us to do things. If rational mankind is to have a future, then we'll have to find grounds, reasons for this, well, existence. And as far as Islam is concerned, well, I'm afraid it simply replaces this kind of rational reflection with the invocation of the will of an all-powerful, of an omnipotent God, which has no, who is not answerable, who has not to explain why he, not he and she, but he only acts in this way. And for this reason, I wouldn't set up, I wouldn't be that confident about the possibility of Islam to ensure the future of a rational mankind. I said rational, ensuring the future of living beings with two legs and walking on their hind legs might be. But the future of mankind as rational, well, I would doubt.
So perhaps the only way to rebuild Europe is to follow Saint Benedict and withdraw from the world. What would you say?
Well, yes. Yes, as far as we don't imagine that the so-called Benedict option means withdrawing from the world. The world, as you know, I won't teach my grandmother to suck eggs. Yeah? That's self-evident. Yeah? What we mean with world is highly ambiguous. Yeah? In the New Testament, the world, that's not, well, let's say the heavens, the heavenly bodies, the earth, the plants, animals. Okay? No, that's creation insofar as it has turned away from its creator. Okay? The world is, well, the creation which endeavors to weigh the anchors vis-à-vis God, to separate itself from God. But the world, in the neutral meaning, the world has taken now, i.e., well, whatever, the whole show, as the idiom has it, what is around us, natural beings in particular, well, is okay. Is okay. And into the bargain, where should we, to which place should we withdraw? It's rather difficult to find a place which would be totally safe. For according, in my opinion, to sound old Christian doctrine, the limit between the good and the evil divides us into parts. Solzhenitsyn had to repeat that, but that's old and classical doctrine. If we were to withdraw from something like the world, we would bring a great deal of world with us into, well, some hermitage or whatnot. The temptations would still be there. Sin would still be there. And grace would still be there as well. So that withdrawing from the world, well, that's not a program that I would condone.
Well, so what a Christian living in the modern world could do? Well, okay, well,
the answer is in the question. He or she must be a Christian. Nothing more is asked.
Yeah, but that's already a tall order. What does it mean? It's like
that's already a tall order. Well, there are 10 commands. There are 7 sacraments. There are 3 virtues, 3 theological virtues. Well, that's a good beginning.
Well, yeah, but we've got about 45,000 of Christian denominations, and they will say different things about what's the Christian doctrine.
Well, there's only one credo, the only one confession of faith. As far as I'm concerned, I find that's enough.
Well,
as I told you, that's a tall order already. If you want to take this seriously, well, let's begin.
Well, yeah, but isn't it a Catholic point of view rather than a Christian?
Well, the trouble with Catholicism is that it is a kind of Christianity.
It's a kind of Christianity? Or,
yes, that's a kind of Christianity. That's the snag, you know. If Catholicism were only some sort of culture, some sort of civilization, a set of habits, a set of practices, this wouldn't be that awful. But that's Christianity at the same time, and that's the difficult thing, you know. That's the real issue, i.e., as far as I know, Christianity, the word Christianity stems from Christ. And well, as far as we try and follow him, we'll be Christians. Catholic, Well, that's not the name of people, that's the name of the church. And perhaps it would not be totally true to the fact to say, I am a Catholic. I would rather say, I belong to the Catholic Church. Nobody is Catholic in him or herself. We are too small for that to be. But we are parts, we are stones, little bricks in the whole building. And this is what is required from us. We don't have to encompass the width, the breadth, the huge dimensions of the church, but we can do what we can at our place.
Okay, so do you think that Europe has any future if it's not Christian? Is it, maybe it's a dead concept?
Well, it depends on what you call by Europe. As far as physical geography is concerned, the odds are very much in favor of the continuation of the existence of this part of the Asian continent. If you mean with Europe a certain kind of civilization, and this is what I'm interested in, the rest is stuff for the geographers. Well, I honestly speaking don't know. The only thing I can say is hypothetical in nature, i.e. a reasoning if, then. I can't say there will be anyway a Europe molded by the principles, values, if you really want this ugly word, that originate in the Christian message, or rather in the Christian phenomenon, the Christian fact. Yeah? But, well, I can't tell you, I can't foresee, I'm no soothsayer, you know, sorry, I forgot my crystal ball in Paris. Yeah? And I can't read, and as far as the cards are concerned, well, I'm afraid I can't read in a pack of cards. But my only contention would be to say if, then. Yeah? And if we, cast away totally Christianity, might be Europe will go on for some time. In the same way as when we launch a stone, we throw a stone, well, it goes on, but finally it falls on the ground. And I'm afraid the same thing would happen. Yeah? The only question would be how long would a really, a radically, a totally post-Christian world last? I honestly speaking don't know. I don't know. Perhaps 1 century, 2 centuries, perhaps less or more. That's an open question.
Well, do we have to be afraid of this new culture? Well, it's a. Or we can do, or we work with it.
If I remember, well, there was this Polish fellow who said some years ago, "Don't be afraid." One of those horrible Polish names that no French throat can pronounce correctly. Okay, something. Fear is being afraid has two sides. On the one hand, it has positive dimensions up to a point, for it makes us inventive. When we get cold feet, we will look with the greatest care for solutions. If we are absolutely not afraid, we will go on and go on blindly till we fall in some pitfall. But we have to use fear with moderation, in the same way as tobacco or alcohol and things like that. There are advertisements for that. Perhaps not in Poland, but in France there are. Please use the alcohol with moderation. And well, fear can trigger in us positive reactions. But it can, if it is not used with moderation, paralyze us. We'll be sort of fascinated like the mice by serpents. They are said to be fascinated and lose their means of flight and let alone of defense. Well, I would plead for a moderate use of fear. Let's say not cold feet, but moderately lukewarm feet could do the job.
Okay.
Of course, you understand the phrase "to get cold feet." Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe we should be afraid of Islam, of Islamism, if there's any difference between them.
Well, there is a difference between Islam and Islamism, but this is not a difference of nature. This is a difference of degree. I would, if I were asked, and fortunately I'm not asked, to define Islamism, I would say that's impatient Islam. And Islam is patient Islamism. Yeah? The aim, the goal, when I say a Muslim, I mean a Muslim who is conscious of what his belief is all about, not just a person who happened to be born in a country in which Islam was the was the leading religion. No, I mean a believer. In the same way as I wouldn't call a Christian a person born in a country that used to be Christian ages or years ago. No. A Muslim has the aim of conquering the world, not in order to be the boss, but in order that the true religion, i.e. Islam, should be given free reins. That's the first condition. Islam doesn't want to convert the world. That's the program of Christianity, to change the hearts of people and to bring them to recognize, the salvation that was wrought by Jesus Christ. The aim of Islam is to subdue the world so that the true religion can be free. And in a second stage, people will convert. But what is aimed at is not directly conversion, but the conditions to conversion. There are some declarations that are ascribed to Muhammad that say exactly that. That's not my invention. And well, in order to reach this objective, there is a bevy of different possible means. Violence is a means among many other ones. And most probably, violence is not the most efficient means, regardless of its, moral value or lack of it. Violence is, as a means, poorly adequate. There are other means. Persuasion, the example of some very holy persons who claimed to be Muslims, mystical experiences, demographic superiority, oil, sorry, oil and money, and, well, foundations that promote some view of history according to which whatever is good in human culture has an Islamic origin, and so on and so forth. There's a great deal of strategies. And what we call at present by the name of Islamism is one among many possible and real strategies, and perhaps not the most dangerous one, because there's a snag in violence. It can arouse people. People can realize that, well, there is a problem there, whereas more peaceful tactics can, well, produce their effects without too much noise. And that's what I would, by the way, that's an idea that I will develop in this book that I am writing, but I'm not sure when I'll be able to, well, really to write it, to finish the redaction. Okay, but that's another question. That's my problem.
Okay. So, is there any division between political and religious spheres in Islam? Isn't it a modern concept? Is there any division? Is there any division between political and religious spheres in Islam?
Okay. Well, that's a
isn't this
frequently asked question. Let me answer in this way. Yes and no. Yes and no. First, no, because what we find in the authorized sources of Islam, i.e. the Holy Book, the Quran, and statements ascribed to the Prophet Muhammad, those sources contain precious little about political questions, if we mean thereby the best way for people to organize their life in common. Nothing in the Quran or in the Hadith, the statements of the Prophet, nothing tells us whether monarchy or aristocracy or democracy has to be chosen as the best kind of as best regime. You can even find people who probably sincerely try to elicit from some statements of the Prophet, and still more from some narratives about his behavior, that Islam can foster some kind of democracy. That's the one point. The other side, and this is the no side of my answer, is that what I should call the Islamic claim extends far wider than politics. This is a claim on whatever has the worth of a rule, of a norm, of a rule of behavior in human being. God's claim, or the claim of the Islamic God, stretches to the field of individual morality. What I have to do as a single person, how I have to comb my hair. I have, for instance, to let my beard grow and to trim my mustachio. This is in a statement by Muhammad. And since Muhammad is, as the Quran has it, the beautiful example a pious Muslim has to follow the rule, has to abide by the commandment, the implicit commandment of the Prophet. This explains why so many pious Muslims let their beard grow and trim their mustachio. Not because this improves their looks, but because this is the will of God transmitted by the Prophet. The claim of the Islamic God stretches to the field of family life. How am I to behave with my wife? Well, I speak from the point of view of a male human being. How shall I behave vis-à-vis my children? It stretches to the field of social and economic life. How shall I have to behave with my boss or with the underlings, with people over whom I have an authority and under whose authority I am? There are rules of behavior. And in the margin, there might be some rules about the way to behave in a political community. But that's rather in the margin. The upshot of all that is that there very well could be an Islamic democracy with a parliament and things, and all the fixings of a democracy. I'm not alluding to the pseudo-Islamic democracy in Iran, for we know that, in fact, the people who pull the strings are the mullahs. They eliminate the possible candidates for MPs, the possible candidates who are not, in the pale, what they admit. But let's imagine, let's dream. A perfect Islamic democracy would have a parliament, but in this parliament, the MPs would be compelled by their own conscience not to pass any bill that would go against God's will, such as it was expressed in the Holy Book or in the declarations, in the statements of the Prophet. To give you a concrete example, some years ago, I'm afraid I don't remember whether this was under the Shah, under the king, or the emperor, if you prefer, or after the Khomeini revolution of 1979. But the parliament toyed with the project of setting a minimal age for marriage of girls. And they said, well, we should forbid girls to get married under 12 years old. Hardly a revolution from our point of view, hardly a revolution. But now, the men of religion, the mullahs, came up with a detail from the life of Muhammad, with the evidence given in one of the two most respected and authoritative collections of statements by the Prophet, the collection by Muslim, that's the name of the fellow who gathered some statements, who gathered and sifted some statements from the life of the Prophet in the 9th century, around 830. And according to this narrative, the Prophet married his youngest wife, Aisha, when she was 6, and he slept with her, he consummated the marriage when she was 9. And then the men of religion said, well, the Prophet did that when the girl was 9. You can't forbid. what the Prophet did. You can't forbid, no human authority can counter the example of the Prophet whom God has chosen and purified. This is, by the way, the meaning of Mustafa, which is, it means the purified one. He was purified in order to be able to, comply his mission, in order to be able to prophetize and to become the leader of the first community, the first Muslim community. And well, for this reason, you know, the authority of the Prophet would be in the mind of each and every MP in this otherwise totally democratically chosen parliament. That's it's important, you know, to put one's finger on the real problem. The problem is not politics and religion. The problem is rather law and religion. The norms, the rules that, well, organize human life and religion. That's the real problem. Politics is, well, a side issue, as a matter of fact.
Okay, so what was the role of the religious law, as you said, in the self-understanding of Islam and in the dialogue or encounters Christian Muslims?
Well, I've tried to show that the law, what we call law, you know, it's difficult, you know. Words are traps. Words are traps. We use the same words, but we don't mean the same thing. Law for us is a set of decisions taken by political instances in organizing the life of society. Those decisions are taken, well, in the best possible cases, in accordance with human conscience. This, we sort of feel that some things are not done, and some things are right, some things are wrong, and so on. Yeah. The ultimate instance for us is conscience. I do not mean thereby the whims of the individuals, an error which is at present rampant in the whole Western world. No, I'm thinking of conscience in the sense that was defined by Pope Benedict. It was redefined. He was only reasserting a very common Catholic doctrine. You know? Well, be that as it may, law, i.e., the commandments of God, are the core, the hard core of Islam. Even, well, let me begin in another way. Let's ponder a while on the word religion. What we, Christians or ex-Christians or would-be Christians, people who live in a culture that was shaped by Christianity, whether they are believers or not. What we mean by religion is first and foremost a set of acts of cult. Prayer, fasting, pilgrimages, the sacramental life in Catholic understanding of what Christianity is all about, and things of that kind. There are equivalents of that in Islam, and I mention, by the way, on purpose, fasting, prayer, alms. giving alms to the poor, pilgrimage and so on. Okay, for us, this is religion. The trouble is that we forget that all those practices depend on God's commands, depend on God's law. The Muslim has to say his or her 5 prayers a day because this is the law. He or she, in some cases, has to go to Mecca as a pilgrim because the law tells him or her that he should do that if he has the means, if he has the money if he can afford. A Muslim gives alms to the poor not because of his or her generosity or to relieve his conscience and to buy some specks of good conscience. No, he or she does that because the law tells him or her to do that, and so on and so forth. And well, the snag is that many politicians in the Western world try to strike a bargain of sorts, to make a deal with the Muslims, a deal which runs as follows. We accept your religion. You may pray, you may fast, you may even go to Mecca. That's good for us, for that's the second source of money for Saudi Arabia. And whatever Saudi Arabia gets will come back to our own safes, for they will buy planes, aircrafts, guns in order to kill as many Yemenites as possible. So that's excellent for us. Okay, go to Mecca, don't hesitate. On the other hand, we don't want your Sharia. We will set our face like flint against your Sharia. Well, if they pray, fast, go to Mecca, give alms, and so on, this is because the Sharia wants it. Or this or that form of Sharia. There are several forms. There is no such thing as the Sharia. This Sharia according to this precise school of law. But anyway, we sort of give them with one hand what we withdraw with the other one. For there is no difference between those acts of cult and, say, the veil the women who came of age have to wear. There is no radical difference between prayer and letting one's beard grow. There's no radical difference between going in pilgrimage to Mecca and fighting, not necessarily with a sword, but fighting by all means in order to increase the domain of Islam. So we sort of, how could I say, with sort of cheat. This is not fair, you know, to say, okay, we give this, we give you this, but we withdraw it at the same time. That's the trouble.
Okay, so thank you for this conversation, and maybe if anyone has a question, I think Mr. Brague will answer it.
Thank you very much. Well, I would have to firstly start by saying that I deeply regret that I haven't yet read any of your books, but I plan to do that as soon as I can, I promise. But I would like to, and so I have, from this talk alone, I have just a lot of questions, but the one I think particularly important to me is, you have mentioned that that in modern Europe, we either base our, let's say, morality, our ethics on religion, or on nothing, on the pure humanity itself that is sort of self-explanatory, meaning that we say we believe that humanity, humanism is the way, and we do not have any justifications for that. But I'm wondering whether there is a third way, mainly, for example, the rule of reason, so to speak. So you have mentioned the French Revolution, and there we have seen very evidently that there was even a cult of reason, the goddess of reason. So maybe that is the way that we can reach certain moral values, such as the sort of the principle to respect everyone's life, with reason alone, with sort of basing on evolution, for example.
Well, thank you so much. Well, this enables me to clarify my statement. I agree. The third solution is the right one. I would hate people to understand that I suppose that the only possible ground for a moral behavior is religion. This is not a Christian idea. This is not even a biblical idea. Just have a look at the basic document of biblical morality, the Decalogue, in Exodus 20. This is a list of what C.S. Lewis, a saint in my personal pantheon, called the Great Platitudes. Can we imagine a human society could survive in which people would slit each other's throats, would rob each other of his or her property, who would sleep with each other's wives against the will of the spouse and perhaps even of the lady herself? Can you imagine a society in which giving a false evidence would be allowed and things like that? The Ten Commandments are the survival kit of mankind. I repeat, the survival kit of mankind, you know? The most basic formula that enables a human life. This is, by the way, the reason why those commandments are to be found almost everywhere. In China, what not? Perhaps on other planets, but I'm no expert on other planets. What's the difference with Christianity? Well, Christianity does not introduce any new commandment, which Islam does. About the beard, about the way for you to wipe your ass. I forgot this example. You have to do that with your left hand, not the right hand. The right hand is for the Quran. The other one is for menial uses. Christianity does not add any new commandment to the list of the Ten Commandments. By the way, this was said very well by this fellow Thomas Aquinas, almost as unknown as the one who said, "Don't be afraid." Thomas Aquinas tells us that the Decalogue is a reminder. It is meant to bring back to our memory what we should know, what we should have known, because that's the natural law. The difference made by Christianity is that it keeps the same commandments, but deepens them by adding an inner dimension. We don't have only to refrain from sleeping with our neighbor's wife. We should not even ogle at her, not even look at her with lust. The first difference. The second difference is the enlargement of the notion of the society inside of which those rules obtain. In, let's say, normal, with quotation marks, in normal human societies, you're not allowed to kill the members of the society, but the other ones can be killed. You are not allowed to sleep with your neighbor's wife, but you are allowed to rape the wives of other societies. You are not allowed to steal things from your neighbor, but you are allowed to pinch but does not belong to the members of the society. The difference introduced by Christianity was to enlarging to the whole of mankind. Each and every human being is my brother, is my neighbor. As you know, the biblical commandment, love thy neighbor as yourself, if you replace it in the context, means love, well, should be explained, respect and so on, your fellow tribesman. Respect the fellow who belongs to the same community as you do. And by the way, Maimonides, the great Jewish legal scholar and philosopher, 1138, 1204. Maimonides explains, when he comments upon the commandment, love thy neighbor as thyself, that it means love your brother in religion. Love the person who shares the same religious faith as yours. And this doesn't mean love each and every human being. That's the second enlargement. And well, we need no religion in order to know what we should do. Whether we need religion in order really to abide by it, really to do what we should do, that's another story. I would be less confident on this point. Perhaps religion, if we take it seriously, can be a great help. There is something that religion, Christian religion, and Christian religion perhaps only can do, is to explain that human life is worthwhile. Human life is worthwhile. The commandments, moral commandments, are the conditions of survival of human life. This presupposes that human life should be respected, that human life has an intrinsic, an inner worth. And in order to do that, in my opinion at least, we need to take into account the God who said at the outset of the 6th day of creation, all this is very good, including human life and whatever led and leads to it. And so I agree. Reason is enough. Reason is enough. The trouble is that we more often than not don't follow our own reason. In order to follow our reason, it might be the case that we badly need God's grace.
Father Mariusz Bigler from the Society of Jesus. I have a very important question. Do you believe in homemade changing of climate? And according to you, it is belong to the Christian creed or not? Should belong or should not belong? It's very important according to natural law.
Gosh. Well, let me distinguish. There must be, it looks like that there is something like global warming. Whether the causes of this global warming is human action or not, I honestly speaking don't know. And as far as the second part of your question is concerned, Father, well, if things, events, phenomena are a menace against God's creation, it's a duty for the Christians to help and to try to counter the negative effects on whatever menaces God's creature. But whether this is part of Christian faith, well, we were not given any supernatural help for us to apply meteorology or astronomy. I mean, the solar, what do you call this? You know, those flecks on the surface of the sun. There must be a word of art which escapes me at present. Well, we were not given supernatural faculties in order to answer these kind of questions. And for this reason, well, I think that a meteorologist, physicist, astronomer, biologist, and so on and so forth, would be more competent than I am.
I have a question here, because very often when we speak about religion in Europe and have a deeper reflection, I'm always surprised that one event from the French Revolution, which might be a kind of offer some hope. Basically, it's never mentioned that 6 weeks after Robespierre had his famous manifestation of the Supreme Being, he lost his head. What basically shows that in the long term, you will not win with the market or with common sense. So shouldn't it also be a kind of an event which offers hope for Europe in terms of, you know, Christianity? Because during the French Revolution, a lot of work was done to destroy Christianity, and as we saw, they didn't manage. And nowadays we have, well, a lot of kind of cults of the Supreme Being, because nowadays you have a lot of idols and very anti-Christian symbols. But won't it end as during the French Revolution? So this is the question. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Well, of course, that's a question for a Frenchman like me. Well, generally speaking, I hate to boast and to say that I'm French, but still, sorry, this was a joke. Please laugh. Otherwise, I'll feel very uneasy. Well, the experience of the French Revolution is interesting because it shows us to what extent an intellectual shift, an intellectual change, which at first blush may seem harmless, can have rather unpleasant consequences. I'm using the word unpleasant in the most British meaning of an unpleasantness. You know, an unpleasantness is, for instance, the Black Death or a genocide or a world war. That's an unpleasantness, according to a British understatement. And well, if there are lessons of history, if history can teach us something, it might be that a brutal attempt at getting rid of Christianity will fail. And there were other attempts ever since. And well, most unfortunately, in some parts of the world, there are still such attempts. But we can be sort of confident, well, that's to be sure a matter of faith, but only of sheer human surmise, human conjecture, we can expect that they will fail. But there are more dangerous attempts, softer attempts, which consist, for instance, in replacing the Christian God with what you've called idols. And there are plenty of idols on the market at the present day. Well, some are evident. Money is evident. Sex is evident. Technology is evident. There might be some still more dangerous idols for which I do not have names for the time being. But we must be on the lookout and be careful and hope that, in fact, those attempts will fail. Hope in the strongest meaning of the word, as the third of the three. Do you say theological virtues or theologal? Faith, hope, and charity.
Theologal.
There's a word of art, the Germans say göttliche Tugenden. We say vertu theologale. Is there some English equivalent? I'm afraid I don't know. You understand what I mean, the three virtues. Godly virtues, that's the idiom. Thank you. Okay, well, hope as a godly virtue is required. But from a merely human point of view, history can teach us that we can hope with a lowercase h, not with a godly virtue, but simply, what history teaches us. If history repeats itself, which is far from being self-evident.
Do you have any more questions?
I wanted to ask about such a group of people that are called Freemasonry. I've heard many things about them. I'm sure everyone has, but we still don't know everything about it and not much about it. So what is the future of them in Europe? And what is their aim? Because it's definitely getting rid of the religions, but still tolerance toward religions, and kind of finding these higher realms of reality in terms of believing in values, which are very important for them, right? Is it good? Or should we be afraid? Not afraid, but okay, this is wrong, but should we just kind of think about it and compare it to Christianity in some way? I don't know.
Well, it's always good to think about things. And as a philosopher, I've earned my living. I've turned an honest penny, as the idiom has it, by trying to think. So I won't tell you anything about thinking. But as far as the object of this thinking is concerned, i.e. Freemasonry, well, I must confess that I know precious little about that. About the future of the Freemason enterprise, if there is such a thing, well, I can't know. The future is God's. And we can't foresee. We can only surmise in a mild and foggy way what could happen. But there's no way for us to reach some certainty about that. Well, as far as the past of Freemasonry is concerned, well, this is a mixed bag. You know, they are. I'm speaking first of all, first and foremost, of my own country. You know, well, there are several groups, several. I don't know how to call them. Not churches, but several. Societies is quite a neutral word. That's the best one. Thank you. There are several Masonic societies, the outlook of which are very much diverse. You know, there is one which always was and still is against religion, and in particular against the Christian religion and the Catholic Church. Okay. There's another society which admits the idea of a God, and this God can be interpreted by some of its members as being the biblical God, the Christian God. Okay. And well, this holds good for France only. In the Anglo-Saxon countries, in Britain, for instance, the Freemasons are, as a rule, God-fearing people, and even, more often than not, committed Christians. So that Freemasonry as a as a bunch of very different tendencies, ideas, worldviews. Well, it's difficult to tell you something really sharp with blunt edges. Well, sorry, with sharp edges. On the contrary, not with blunt edges. Okay. What can be how could I put that? A meeting point between some of those people and the Christian Church and the Catholic Church could be what you've just been calling values. They, from time to time, foster values, freedom, truth, things like that, which are... I wouldn't call this by the name of charity. Charity is too lofty a name, you know, to be precisely because that's a godly virtue. I would say, generosity, helping people, rescuing the poor, and simpler fare, yeah, simpler vocabulary. There might be a possible encounter. The trouble being that there are values, to use the word, I dislike the word, but okay, I can't find any better one for the time being. Those values have something to do ultimately with the very worth of human life. And not only of the life of those featherless bipeds, which I alluded to earlier, but to the life of a full-fledged human being, i.e., the life of the human being which is endowed with reason, with freedom, and with an openness to God. Whether we can salvage those values for a long time, in the long run, without our having to confess that their very worth, the very worth of the values, if I may play on words, the very worth of the values depends on the worth of creature. And the worth of creatures depends on their being created. For otherwise, we won't have a leg to stand on. We'll have to fight for values that have no ground, which can last for some time, but I wouldn't be that sanguine about the long run.
So maybe last question.
You wrote about Marcionism, and I have a question. If we as a Catholics, as a Christian, we are invited to face Marcionism, is our privilege or our duty?
Well, that's a good question. First, let me perhaps say some words about this idea of Marcionism, for the word might not be familiar to the whole of the audience. Marcion was a priest in the 2nd century after Christ who advocated a radical solution for the problem of how the what we call the Old Testament and the New Testament have to be articulated on one another. There must be a relationship between the two sets of writings, but their relationship is not that easy. According to the old saying, Novum Testamentum in altere latet, the New Testament lies in hiding in the Old Testament. Vetus Testamentum in novo patet. The Old Testament is revealed, is opened in the New Testament. Okay. This is not an easy task. When we read the Old Testament, at first blush, we must really scratch the back of our head and ask, well, how can this be? How can this be considered as leading to its own fulfillment in the life of Jesus Christ? There are several ways to answer the challenge and to meet the challenge. The main one, as far as the church fathers were concerned, was allegory. The Old Testament apparently tells us the tale of King David or people like that. In fact, they are a foresight, a preparation of what happened in Jesus Christ. But there was another solution, a most radical one, and it was Marcion's solution. The Old Testament was not the work of the same God as the New Testament. In the New Testament, we have a God of sheer love, of sheer mercy, and in the Old Testament, we have only a God of justice, of severity, of punishment, and so on. And by the way, this view can be found still now. Okay, then Marcion said, we'll have to prune the Old Testament. We'll have to bowdlerize it. We'll have to remove from it what was not made by the God of love and mercy. And even in the New Testament, we'll have to get rid of whatever is not the pure expression of love, mercy, and forgiveness and things. Okay. And he was well, the church did not accept this too brash solution and, well, condemned his doctrine. But the temptation recurs and is still recurring. Let me give you two examples. Tolstoy, the great Russian novelist, thought very much along the same lines. For him, what is good in the New Testament is the Sermon on the Mount, full stop. The rest, okay, can be forgotten. This Protestant theologian, Adolf von Harnack, great scholar, and a very influential theologian, said the Old Testament had to be kept in the first church, in the early church. If Luther, he was a Protestant, if Luther kept it, it's because of a failure of nerve. He should have expelled it out of the canon. And if we now, in the 19th century, keep it, that's a scandal, that's a shame. That's a recurrent temptation, which has to do with the way in which we think of the relationship between Jesus and his church, to which we belong, and the people of Israel. Not the state of Israel, but the Jewish people at large. From a certain point of view, it would be easier to say, okay, you Jews, you have the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament. You can give it other names, Tanakh, Hebrew Bible, and what you want. We keep the New Testament for us. Okay, each has his property, everybody is happy. We can't do that. We can't do that because the very story of Jesus Christ is hardly understandable if we don't understand it as the story of the Messiah, of Israel's Messiah, of the fulfillment of the promises, the fulfillment of the covenant between God and mankind, represented by the first sample, so to speak, the first sample, which is the people of Israel. The what theologians call the hypostatic union, you know, the doctrine according to which in the person of Jesus Christ there are two natures, the godly nature, the divine nature, and the human nature. This is the complete fulfillment of the covenant between God and his people, concentrated in a single person, the person of Jesus Christ. And for this reason, Marcionism has to be discarded. In my book on European culture, the book that you were as nice as to translate, you know, the Roman Way is would be the literal translation of the Polish title, but the play on words disappeared. Okay, that's a side issue. Anyway, I said, well, we are tempted to by some sort of generalized Marcionism, which consists in weighing the anchors, in casting away what comes before, whatever came before us. Previous civilizations, earlier history, the very nature of things. Nature, with a capital N, is whatever comes before us, what we found already there when we entered this world. And there is a temptation This is, in my opinion, what lurks behind the so-called transhumanist project. This is a radical Marcionism, saying good riddance to whatever came, whatever was before us, in order to recreate ourselves in the same way as von Münchhausen drew himself out of the quagmire by pulling on his own wig, creating ourselves, as if this were possible. And for this reason, Marcionism does not belong only to the remote past of church history. That's a still recurring temptation, which we have to stave off with the greatest care.
I have a question. Maybe it's a simple question. I don't know. I don't study philosophy, but I just wanted to know would Christianity have formed without Greek philosophy, and if yes, what would it look like, and in what way would it be different from present Christianity?
My gosh. Well, I share the idea that was expressed by Pope Benedict, whom, by the way, I admire deeply and love to some extent, if I may allow myself to love so high a being. I share the idea which was expressed by Pope Benedict, which is to be found in von Balthasar too, and which is to be found in other earlier writers like William Foxwell Albright, the author of From the Stone Age to Christianity, who was an archaeologist and Christian, and committed Christian at the same time. That's the encounter between Christianity and Greek thought, Greek philosophy, was sort of providential. It enabled Christianity to formulate its own beliefs in a precise way, thanks to concepts that had been honed and been refined by Greek philosophy. Without Christianity having ever simply yielded to Greek philosophy, Christian theology is not a knock-off of Greek philosophy. Christian dogmatics never made use of Greek philosophical categories without its criticizing them, relativizing them. A good example is the theory of the Eucharist. According to the Catholic dogma, the substance of the bread becomes the substance of Christ's risen body, but the species remain there. According to the conceptions of Greek philosophy, this is simply preposterous. Preposterous. That a substance could change. The words are there, the concepts are there, and they are used in a very rigorous way, but the content is turned upside down or inside out. And this is, by the way, the reason why the Council of Trent refrained from using the run-of-the-mill philosophical distinction between substance and accidents. This is plain Aristotelian sailing. Substance, accidents. No, They said substance, species. They refused to get sort of caught into a merely philosophical category. Yeah? This is a complicated play. Yeah? Christian dogmatics borrows a certain amount of notions from Greek philosophy, but does not leave them alone. It changes them. And for this reason, it would be simply wrong to say that, well, Christian dogmatics, that's simply Greek philosophy by other means. No, that's dreadfully untrue. I had another idea, but I forgot it. Sorry. The second part of your question was... Oh yeah, what would be Christianity without? Well, I'm afraid this would be something like the Ethiopian church, which is, well, Ethiopian Christians are very good people. There's much holiness in their church. The no dogmatics, sheer practice, sheer liturgy, sheer ritus. And well, I'm sure that as many people reach salvation in the Ethiopian church than in our highly refined and intellectually, brilliant Catholic Church. But I would prefer the Catholic kind. Simply because, well, I happen to be a philosopher, and I wouldn't feel at home in a church that would reduce itself to the fulfilling of some rites. I wouldn't, well, I would intellectually starve. I couldn't feed on such practice. And there are, while I'm about it, there is a temptation of this kind in some Orthodox churches. Some Orthodox churches. Some years ago, I wrote a preface for the book written by a French lady who had converted to the most radical kind of orthodoxy. You know, those people who have not even accepted the new calendar. The reform of the calendar in 1582 was accepted by the Church of Greece, with the exception of a small group, people who live on a remote island, a stone's throw from Turkey. And there's a convent there, and well, you should read that. This would give you the creeps.
Okay, so I think we came to an end of our meeting. Thank you for coming today, Professor Brague. Well, if you have any further questions, you can answer them now, or you can buy some books of our guest. We've got a big discount today, so... Yep, thank you for coming. Thanks for having